Hey guys, my name is Alisha and welcome to my channel. So today I'm going to be doing my July wrap up. So I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in July, and it's been a great reading month. I don't know how I read as many books as I did this month, so I'm actually pretty proud of myself, but let's get into the books that I read and how I thought about them. So I did start the month off with Summerween, and I didn't read as many books as I wanted to during Summerween, but I was pretty happy with like how I started the month. And then this month has been pretty busy. Like I went on vacation for about a week where I didn't read anything, and then I was in a bit of a reading slump honestly towards like the middle of July. So yeah, I don't know how I read as much as I did, but here we are. So I read 15 books this month, which I think is the highest amount that I've read all year. So I think 1 month I read 14, but 15 is a new record. But just to go over some of the stats. So I was, I guess, in a really big romance thriller mood because I read 6 romance books. Then I read 4 thriller / mystery books, and then 2 horror books, 2 contemporary books, and 1 fantasy book, which is again surprising because I usually read a lot of fantasy and I guess wasn't in the mood for fantasy this month, but is what it is. So moving on to the age groups, I read 11 adult books and 4 young adult. Also kind of surprising because I feel like I tend to read more young adult books, but like I guess I've been moving into kind of reading a lot more adult books, so you know, I'm not mad about it. I also did DNF a couple of books this month. I didn't really get that far into either of them, so like I'm not counting them in the books that I did read, but I read Love Scenes, and I'm forgetting the author's name, but it is a adult romance book about I think like Hollywood behind the scenes, that kind of thing. And I don't know, it just wasn't like, I didn't really feel the chemistry, didn't really care about either of the characters, so I just kind of gave up on it. And then I also started Enchantée by I think Gita Trellis, and so this is a young adult fantasy book. It takes place, I believe, in like historical times and in like France, so it definitely had a cool premise, but again, I just wasn't really vibing with the like writing, so I'm not gonna, like, that one I might read at a later point, but I just wasn't feeling it when I picked it up this month. Now just going over the ratings for this month. So I read 4 5-star books, which is pretty high. I think I definitely read a few of like some new favorites this month, so that was pretty exciting. And then I have 2 4.5-star books, 4 4-star books, 3 3-star books, and then 1 2.5-star and 1 2-star. So I feel like definitely I had a better reading month, and like a lot of the books were above 3 stars, so that's pretty good. So lastly, just going over the method of reading, I guess. So I read 4 books physically, 6 books on audio, and 5 books on ebook. Another surprising thing, because I haven't really been reading ebooks a lot, but I definitely read a lot more this month. So yeah, those are the stats for this month. Now let's get into the actual books. So the first book I read this month was the Kiss Quotient by Helen Huang. I rated this book 5 stars, and I had such a great time with this book. It was so much fun, and I absolutely loved it. It might be one of my favorite romances now, but basically this is an adult romance. It is about a woman named Stella who is somewhere on the autistic spectrum, and so she definitely has a hard time kind of dealing with social situations and interacting with other people and like being comfortable with all that. And so she decides that like basically I think to like get a boyfriend or to practice how to be in a relationship, she decides to hire an escort who is going to, in a way, yeah, just kind of teach her how to be in a relationship. So her escort that she hires is named Michael, and Michael is Korean American, and he is a little younger, I think, than Stella as well. And so he has some stuff going on at home where he needs kind of extra money, so he agrees to be the escort, and you know, they end up having a bit of a relationship. This book was so cute and very steamy, and I absolutely loved the relationship between Stella and Michael. I think Michael was such a great person for Stella and like took a lot of care of her, especially at the start when like he didn't necessarily have to, but he was really like made her feel comfortable in every situation. And like seeing the autistic representation I think was also really well done. Obviously I don't have like any say in that or experience in that, but like from reading it, I think it was really well done. It touched on a lot of like even small details of like what somebody in that position, like their life is. And especially at the end of the book, the author's note, Helen Huang talks about how she herself is on the autistic spectrum, and so she is coming from a place of like her own experiences and talking about what she herself has gone through. So I think it was really well done. And yeah, absolutely love Stella and Michael. They had so much chemistry and they were so cute, and love this book. So now moving on to some of the books that I read during Summerween. So first up, I read Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. So I gave this book 4.5 stars. And I really love this book. Honestly, it might have been even closer to a 5-star read. It was such a fun, maybe fun isn't the right word, but it was such an atmospheric and interesting read. It is a horror novel, and I mean, it's not scary per se, but it definitely had a lot of kind of horror, gothic, spooky vibes throughout, and especially towards the end, there were some scenes that were like, I wouldn't say gruesome, but definitely got a little gross and gory and things like that, but that was definitely towards the end of the book. This book, like Silvia Moreno Garcia's writing, it's absolutely stunning. It's beautiful. It's so atmospheric, lyrical. I absolutely love it. And I've pretty much loved every book I've read of Silvia Moreno Garcia's, especially Gods of Jade and Shadow, one of my favorite books of all time. And so I knew I was gonna like love her writing. Another thing that I love that this author does is how she writes her female characters, because the main character in this book, as well as her other books, are just always really kind of rebellious and trying to like smash patriarchy and like, you know, speak up for themselves and have their own voice and things like that. And yeah, Silvia Moreno Garcia just does such a good job of writing these characters, especially because I believe all of her books take place in like historical times. So, you know, it's a different time period and different time for women especially. So yeah, this author just does a great job of that. This book basically is about a young woman named Noemi. It does take place in Mexico. So Noemi gets a letter from her cousin who is living with her husband's family. And basically her cousin is telling her that something's wrong and she needs help, basically. So Noemi goes to the mansion that her cousin and her cousin's family lives in like the countryside in Mexico, and basically is seeing firsthand what's going on, trying to figure out what's happening, if like how she can help her cousin. And whilst doing that, a lot of creepy and like weird things are happening within like her cousin's husband's family, as well as just the house they're living in. So yeah, it definitely had like a horror, you know, haunted house vibe, a lot of gothic vibes. This book also did a great job of talking about issues like racism and colonialism and yeah, things like that. So definitely touched on very important themes, and again, the writing absolutely stunning. This book I definitely did really love. So then next I read The Kind Worth Killing by Peter Swanson. So this is a thriller novel. It's honestly pretty hyped. I think it's like a lot of people's favorite thriller, so I was definitely going into this with pretty high expectations. I ended up giving this book 4 stars, and I did really enjoy it. I think it had some of the best plot twists that I've ever read. It was definitely a ride reading this book, because honestly there was like, you know, directions that I thought the book was going to take, and it just completely turned that on its head and did something completely different. So I love that. And I think there was something like 3 or 4 plot twists in this book, and like none of them you're expecting. So I love that part. I also loved the characters themselves and like their backstories and how everything kind of tied together, because at the start of the book, like you don't really know who these people are and like what they have to do with each other and like, you know, why things are happening. So yeah, I think it was really well done and a really fun and fast and thrilling read. So next up I read Katherine House by Elizabeth Thomas. So this is a adult horror, kind of dark academia vibes book, and I didn't like it. I gave this book 2 stars, and I know a lot of people have said pretty good things about it, and like on the other hand, some people also don't like it at all. So I definitely was on the side of not liking it, and I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that this book doesn't have like a plot at all. Like it was just kind of going through this girl's everyday life and supposedly leading up to something, which we just never, like, for me at least, I just was never invested in the characters enough to care about them. And given that there was no plot and like you couldn't really tell where this book was going or like what it was supposed to be doing, I just was pretty bored throughout. And yeah, so like there was no plot and I didn't really get the point of the book because after reading it, I did try to watch some like author interviews and like reviews of other people. And supposedly this book, kind of the message I think behind it is talking about kind of elite institutions and how they take advantage, especially of minority people, like Black people. And the main character in this book is Black, I believe. And so that was kind of the main message, but I just don't think the author executed what she was trying to do, so I was pretty disappointed in that. But it definitely did have you know, some horror, not even horror honestly, like nothing scary about the book, but just some spooky vibes and like kind of that atmosphere, so it did do a good job of that. But for me personally, that just wasn't enough for me to be truly invested in this book. So next up I have another romance book, and that is The X Talk by Rachel Lynn Solomon, I believe is the author's name. And this book I gave 3 stars. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it. It was just kind of in the middle. It was definitely a fun read, a fast read. I did like the characters. I liked the chemistry between the main love interests, and I thought the like premise of the book was really cool. It is about this radio station, and the 2 main leads are like reporters in the radio station. And so it is also a bit of a hate to love romance because the main characters seemingly don't like each other at the start, and then obviously throughout like build a relationship and end up falling in love. I guess it just didn't really stand out to me. I also thought because the male main character was Korean American, so it definitely had some good diversity. I just feel that, you know, it kind of just felt like putting in a person of color just for the sake of it, because we didn't really get any representation of this character. There was maybe one scene where the character talked about their personal struggles, or like how they kind of like deal with like living as a person of color and from this ethnicity and this culture, and how that impacts their like daily life. As well as actually there was, I think, some Black characters, some other LGBTQ characters, but I felt like they were just thrown in there and didn't really add to the story in terms of like that representation. So not like knock necessarily on the book, but I just feel like it could have done a better job at actually expanding those things. So overall, this was a good book. So next I read Upon a Burning Throne, which was the only fantasy book I did read, and it also is adult fantasy, so it definitely is a kind of a completely different area that I haven't really read before, because I normally do read young adult fantasy. And I have mixed thoughts about this book. It's a huge book. It's, I think, almost 700 pages, so it definitely is chunky and it took a while to get through. And I think this book is the reason I was low-key put into a reading slump, not because the book was terrible or anything, it was just such a slug to get through, so keep that in mind. But I gave this book 3 stars, again because I just don't think I should be in the position to rate it any lower, because just because I didn't necessarily enjoy my reading experience doesn't mean the book was bad itself. So basically what this book is about is it's a kind of retelling of the Mahabharata, which is a epic Indian myth based on like, I think, Indian and like Hindu mythology. So it definitely took a lot of that, and I personally haven't, like, I've very little knowledge of what the Mahabharata is actually about, and I think that was a good thing, because this book has changed a lot of things, and I think kind of added and taken away some things, which I had read in some reviews that people didn't necessarily like because they felt that it maybe took away from the actual myth. But I personally, since I didn't really know much about the original myth, didn't mind that. But this book, what it did a great job of was definitely the writing. Absolutely, like, fantastic writing, very lyrical, very descriptive. Also the world building, again, because it's such a big book, I think it needed to do like a great job of the world building, and a lot of the book is about the actual world we're in and what's going on, and how these like different characters have ended up in these the situations that they're in. So those things were great. Another big thing about this book was the kind of political side. So there was a lot of like political intrigue, espionage, like war, violence, like war scenes in like the battlefield and things like that. So if you are into that, you might enjoy this book as well. But overall, I think honestly, just because it was very long and very like, it just took a lot to get through and like get into that actual world building and reading all of that. So it just wasn't necessarily for me. But overall, this book was really, really well done. And then next up, I have Tokyo Ever After by Amiko Jean, I think is the author's name. And I gave this book 3 stars. It is a contemporary sort of romance book, and it has been compared a lot to The Princess Diaries, which I completely agree with. It definitely had that kind of fun contemporary vibe to it, as well as dealing with a young girl who discovers that she is the heir to the Japanese empire. And so she finds out that her dad is I believe he's the prince. I kind of forget the actual politics and government of that, but she is the heir to the Japanese kind of political government people. And so so she finds that out. So she goes to Japan to spend some time with her dad and kind of understand the politics and government that she is supposedly going to like take over at some point one day. And so for me, this book, again, like the premise was really cool, and I did enjoy the twist of the sort of Princess Diaries idea, but it again just didn't really stand out, and it was a fun time. But I think a lot of it was, again, because I read this after having been in my reading slump, so I just didn't enjoy it as much as I could have. But definitely a really fun book and a great read. So next up, I have The Hunting Wives by May Cobb, and this is a adult thriller mystery book, and I gave this 4.5 stars. I really had a great time reading this, and it is a bit of like a cozy mystery sort of book, because it's not necessarily like very kind of edge of your seat mystery, but it definitely like made you question some things, and the plot twists and things were also really well done. But basically, this book is about a woman named Sophie who has moved to this kind of small town in Texas, I believe, with her husband and young son. And so she is at this point in her life where she doesn't really know where she's like what she's doing, and she's like recently quit her job and has started this kind of like social media page and is trying to become like this influencer. And she's kind of bored, to be honest, because she's kind of become a housewife and like has wanted to spend more time with her child and is at this different point in her life. So she's pretty bored, and she ends up falling into this very elite kind of mean girls group of women who are in this club called the Hunting Wives, where they go out and hunt and end up doing a lot of crazy things that Sophie was not expecting. But she kind of falls into this and now has to be a part of the group, has to participate, and then ends up kind of dealing with their craziness. And basically a murder takes place and Sophie is at the center of it. And so she doesn't says she didn't do it, and she doesn't know if somebody's framing her and what's going on and how does she clear her name. So most of the book is about that mystery, as well as I think there's 2 or 3 murders. And so at the end, Sophie is at the center of all of it and is being accused of murdering these people. So she has to clear her own name and figure out what is actually happening. So I absolutely love the book itself, the premise, the plot, the characters, the interactions. I love the kind of Mean Girls elite vibe, and that how Sophie herself was trying to become included, and very fast and unpredictable read. So I really love this one. So next up I have The Trouble with Hating You by Sajni Patel. So this is a adult romance. It also obviously has Indian main characters, which we love, that representation. And so I really love this book. I think I gave this book 4 stars, and I just had a great time reading it. The romance itself was really great. I think it was a good job of, it technically is a hate to love, but I think it was a good job of actually having characters who hated each other and then built their relationship and their bond and ended up being in love. So I love that aspect. I also love the Indian representation and the Desi South Asian culture that was shown, as well as as well as the kind of Desi society and like mentality, because a lot of this book does deal with kind of, especially the main woman character, dealing with internalized misogyny and sexism in her own community, and kind of breaking away from that and being her own person and having her own voice. So I love those aspects of this book. Also showed a lot about kind of that society, how it basically is very judgmental, and how kind of especially younger people or women have to deal with kind of doing everything for show, and like constantly thinking about how other people will perceive their actions. So not being able to do things like how they want to or what they want to because, oh, what will other people say? So yeah, so I think this book did a great job of talking about those issues in Desi society. Overall, the main character, Leah, was, again, like I was saying, very outspoken and kind of that rebellious nature, but she was a little annoying. I do think of some of her choices, especially in the middle, like in dealing with the actual romance and relationship, she was just making stupid decisions that I couldn't really get behind. But overall, I, again, like did like the romance. I love the male main character as well. Jay was his name. And I loved their relationship. There was a lot of banter and like funny, cute moments. So definitely a good book. And I don't know if I said my rating, but I gave this book 4 stars. So next I read An Emotion of Great Delight by Tara Mafi, and this is her new release. It's her, I think, second contemporary novel, and if you've read A Very Large Expanse of Sea, it is kind of closely very similar to that book in terms of the themes discussed and the characters and things like that, because this book as well deals with a young woman who is a Muslim hijabi living in America. It is taking place about a year after 9/11, whereas I think A Very Large Expanse of Sea was closer to 9/11 or like during that time. So this is kind of the aftermath of that. But she's also an Iranian American girl, and so yeah, a lot of this book is dealing with the kind of themes of Islamophobia and racism and sexism in the kind of like Muslim community. So it was like a very heavy and tough read, to be honest. It was really, really sad. But other than those like themes of kind of Islamophobia and racism, I think what this book was essentially dealing with was grief and pain and loss and like these complicated relationships and emotions that people have. And I think this book just did such a fabulous job of kind of showcasing those emotions, and especially showing a young girl dealing with just so much at a very, you know, kind of scary time for Muslim people in America. So basically this book is about Shadi, who is a young teenager, and she is a hijabi girl, like I said, and her brother has recently passed away, and her father is in the hospital and he's very sick. Her sister is kind of not a great sister. She has recently kind of lost her relationship with her best friend because of some things we find out during the book, and she's also kind of dealing with like her love life being kind of crazy, and she is taking on a lot as a young girl because she's trying to protect her mother and like help her mother not have to deal with so much as well. So again, there's a lot going on in this young girl's life. So basically I love this book. I think it was so well done. I think the writing was amazing and beautiful, and everyone should definitely read this book. I thought A Very Large Expanse of Sea was one of my favorite kind of contemporary books, but this one is even better than that. So very, very, very well done. So next up is a pretty highly anticipated book. It's a new release of 2021, but that is The Maidens by Alex Michaelides. So I gave this book 4.5 stars. I really had a great time reading this book. I think the atmosphere was really captivating, and the plot itself was like really interesting and honestly pretty unique, so I was very happy with it. For this book itself, it was basically about a woman who has been going through a lot. She is dealing with the loss of her husband recently, and then she finds out her niece is the school that her niece goes to, there's been a murder there, and the murder has been of her niece Zoe's best friend. And so this woman, Mariana, goes to that school and is basically there to help her niece cope with everything, but ends up kind of low-key involving herself in solving the murder and figuring out what had happened. So what I loved about this book was first of all, like the dark academia vibes. It is taking place on a college campus. Again, not necessarily like a student themselves, because the main character is a older woman, and so it's surrounding her life more. But yeah, love the plot, love the atmosphere, love the incorporation of kind of like Greek life in terms of like college life, as well as just like Greek gods and Greek myth. And I also really loved the kind of plot twist and the actual mystery in the book. I think what this book did so well was having actually a lot of kind of red herrings, where you didn't really know who was the murderer, and I could not guess, and I didn't guess right when I did. So I do think that part was done again really well. So then next up I have honestly one of my favorite reads of 2021, and that is Ace of Spades by Farida Abike-Iyamidi. So this is a young adult kind of thriller mystery book, and it was just absolutely amazing. I gave this book 5 stars, and like there's nothing bad I can say about this book. I think throughout it was such a fun and fast and interesting read, but it also was dealing with so many kind of very important and powerful themes and messages, and the actual delivery of the book was perfect. So overall, just a brilliant book. So the next book that I read was She Drives Me Crazy by Kelly Quinlan, I believe, and I gave this book 4 stars. It was a YA romance contemporary book, and it was such a cute and fun read. I also read it like in a day. This book is basically about a young girl who is a basketball player, and she's gone through a recent breakup that was pretty bad, and so she ends up being rear-ended by this cheerleader who she kind of has this not so great past with, because the cheerleader has bullied her in the past. And so she ends up having to drive the cheerleader to school because her car gets pretty much towed. And then they end up starting this fake dating situation. And so yeah, this has fake dating, it has hate to love, it's a very cute kind of romance. It has sports and like, you know, cheerleaders, basketball, things like that. And yeah, I just had a great time reading this book. I think it was really fun. I think the romance was really cute. It also has some good representation because the cheerleader character is from, I believe her family is Indian, so she is Indian American, and so that is discussed in the book, which I also loved. So next I read It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey, and I honestly picked this book up because I had been hearing so many great things about it, and it is a adult romance, a pretty steamy read as well, but I didn't enjoy this book at all. I think I ended up giving it 2 stars, maybe 2.5 stars, and I just didn't have a good time. I think there's a lot of things that I didn't necessarily love about the book that kind of put me off reading it, and it kind of took me a while to get through, so I also think that was a part of it. But it is about a woman named Piper who is a kind of Hollywood elite starlight person, and so her father, she goes through a situation where her stepfather basically is like, you need to learn some kind of responsibility and things like that, so I'm gonna send you to this low-key like town in Washington. And so she has to pack her bags from LA, and she's a very like she has a certain style and standard of living, so when she goes to this small town, it's very different for her. But her sister also comes along because the small town is actually where her father was from, and her mother hasn't been back to the small town, and these 2 siblings basically know nothing about their father or their own past with this area. So the main character, Piper, is I don't know if she was written to be this way or it just is like the comparisons, but she is kind of like Alexis from Schitt's Creek, and I'm not a huge fan of Schitt's Creek, but I have watched a few episodes and I definitely see the comparisons, because Piper definitely in this book was very witty and like snarky and had a lot of interesting and funny comebacks, and was just a really fun character to read from, honestly. But one of the things I didn't like, however, was Brendan, who was the love interest. And so he is this very kind of rugged and I kind of like cynical fisherman, and his broodiness just never really grew on me. And so I have nothing against kind of broody and downcast characters, but I think his broodiness just came off in a way that just wasn't kind of cute or fun for me. But that part, then as well as the relationship part, so Piper and Brendan's relationship, I personally felt like there was very little chemistry. At least I didn't feel any chemistry. And there were a lot of sex scenes and like steamy scenes, but like they were fun, but they weren't, I don't know, like the actual chemistry of the characters I wasn't feeling. I also think that technically I think this book starts off with like a bit of a hate to love trope because the characters get off on the wrong foot, but very quickly that is erased. And then I think after like 2 interactions, Brendan starts having like sort of feelings for her, and like Piper kind of too, but I just felt like it was very sudden, and they went from like people who don't know each other at all and maybe even hate each other to suddenly people who are ready to like give up everything and like die for each other. So I feel like it definitely took a bit of a 180, and so I couldn't really get behind that. And I mean, not to say that there wasn't build up to that, but I just think again, because of the lack of chemistry and the lack of like actually building or like seeing this bond being built, we were just kind of told that like, okay, now they're in love and they are like super into each other and like all of those things. So I didn't love that part either. And then lastly, a book that I just finished today as I'm filming this is Written in the Stars by Alexandra Belfer, I think. And this is a adult romance. It's a sapphic book. It has a lesbian romance, and I thought this book was really cute and fluffy and steamy as well. I gave this book 4 stars, and it was a pretty fun and fast read. It basically is about a girl. It's actually I believe kind of inspired by Pride and Prejudice, but it's about a girl named Elle who is very much a believer in true love, very optimistic. She's an astrologer, and then she meets Darcy, who is obviously like the Darcy character from Pride and Prejudice. She is a bit of a cynic, you know, a bit jaded, doesn't believe in true love, doesn't want any of this stuff. But basically these 2 characters end up fake dating, and like throughout their relationship end up, you know, falling for each other. And this honestly, it was pretty basic in terms of the trope itself. It was pretty basic fake dating trope, hate to love sort of, but I think it was just done pretty well, and a lot of chemistry between the characters. I really like the characters on their own as well in terms of like their own character development. So overall I had a fun time reading this book. So those were the books that I read in July. Like I said, 15 books, a lot of books, very impressed with myself. And yeah, I had a great reading month. So thanks for watching this video, guys, and I'll see you next time.